Okay, recording. That smooth new Zoom feature
Right.
to let us all know we're being recorded. Wonderful. So hello everybody to another episode, yay, of Coaches at the Leading Edge. It's one of my favorite things that we do in Like the Grid. And today, so a few weeks ago, I posted, what's happening? Excuse me. They found my coffee is probably what happened.
Hopefully they're bringing it.
It'll be good for you guys. I asked a question. What is it that would be really helpful? Something like, what would be really helpful to know that they never taught you in coaching school? You know, like what is, now that we are coaches and we have clients and we are in our practice, you know, there's the first set of skills that we need to learn as coaches: how to ask open-ended questions, how we're not consultants, we don't give advice, how all that stuff, right? Hi. No coffee.
Sorry, this for the working white mom is the crazy is here.
Oh, great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Priorities, people, priorities.
I know.
The same way.
This is like, everyone's used to this now though, because we've all been on Zoom and experienced all these things. Okay, so what do we need to know that they don't teach us in coach school? And after we coach for a while, it's like, oh, wait a minute, sometimes actually giving advice is a good idea. That's the most helpful thing. Along with so many different modalities that are helpful in different circumstances. One of the quickest, smartest things for coaches to learn is where they are gifted at something and trained at something and where they are not, and to have the wherewithal and the humility to be able to refer to, hopefully they have a whole, you know, team of people with different modalities and ways that they work with people, that they could say, you know what, you really need to be working with relationship coaches for this reason, that I'm a business specialist. Here's an amazing relationship coach for you. One of the first most obvious ones that we learn is to refer clients to therapists, right? So in our initial conversations with a potential client, we really want to be scanning for, is this somebody who I can work with where I will be well equipped and not out of my depth in terms of the level of maybe depression, maybe anxiety, maybe trauma, maybe so many different things that are just not what we are trained to deal with, that require something completely different. And sometimes it's very clear. It's like, wow, I really wouldn't know how to hold the space here for it to be healthy and useful. I absolutely recommend therapy. Go to do that, have that, blah, 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 come back. And also, when we coach, most coaches discover that the deep transformational work that we want to do with people, that people come to us for and love working with us for, happens over long periods of time. So, you know, a 1 month, a 3 month kind of thing, that's fine in the beginning when we're just learning how to create clients. But then we just sort of notice that our really good clients that we're getting somewhere with after 3 months re-sign up with us. And so we're like, oh, okay, 6 months, a year, however long. The thing that happens though, when you're working with someone for the long term, even though this was not a therapy situation to begin with, it was straight up coaching, is that trust develops and depth develops. And you begin to peel the layers of the onion with the person. And I'd say if you're doing good work, you're going to end up in the places that there has been wounding, and those deep core beliefs come from somewhere. Those triggers exist. The reason those blocks happen in the world, in their reality creation, happens because, I mean, I don't know anybody who isn't in some way wounded from whatever in their childhood. I don't think we get to be humans without going through really deep stuff that, to different levels and degrees, traumatizes us, right? I mean, there's levels on that. So I don't want to like all of a sudden just be like, you're all traumatized, but there's really deep shit, right? And as a coach, all of us, you've been great and in integrity, because this hasn't been somebody who's looking for therapy. You've been doing coaching, but all of a sudden you're in a session and their body just freezes, you know, or their thinking just all of a sudden becomes this like cycle of just, for you, that doesn't make sense, illogical stuff, right? And just the emotions and the feelings and the content and the mind is just gone because it's in fight or flight. Or something like that happens after your sessions, or you're just sort of noticing this pattern that like anytime we come near this thing goes on, or anytime we start looking at really the fear underneath the fear, they just can't go there. It's just stone, right? How much do we push there and how much don't we? And it's different for everybody. But I have a feeling that this word that's come up a lot in the last year, which I really like, trauma informed, there isn't any of that in our trainings, and we're missing it because we're going to come across it. So first, it's important for us to know, okay, this is too much for me, I need to refer this, but also there probably is a really great skill set somewhere for us to know how to help, how to be supportive, and how to not do any further damage, right? Sometimes pushing those buttons might feel provocative and awesome and cool and like you're doing some kind of badass coaching, but it's actually doing a disservice to your client. Sometimes it's the perfect thing to do, right? Where are those landmines and how do we work around them? And I know from the threads, there was one question that I'm going to also put in the room, Michelle, for you to just, with everything I just said, and one more thing, I'm going to let you take it from there, introduce yourself, and please wisen us up. She asked if there was any connection between adult ADD and, this is Laura's question, adult ADD and sort of childhood abuse, verbal, emotional, that kind of thing. And she also noticed that sometimes, or she's read that meditative mindfulness practices are sometimes not called for in those situations. So I feel like one of the holy grail of coaching, right, is like mindfulness practices, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Are there times when that's actually inappropriate and not a good thing?
Yeah.
That's my spiel. And so, Michelle, I'm so excited for today and everything you have to share. Tell us about
Thank you. So I will address that specific question after I've laid a couple of foundational pieces down.
Great.
So my name is Michelle Maree. That's actually my first name and middle name. It's actually Michelle Maree Hardiman Guptill. It's the longest last name ever. And I'm trying to distinguish my therapy practice from my coaching practice by using my middle name in my coaching practice. So I've been a therapist who specializes in trauma for the last 15 years. And little bit of backstory. I have my own trauma history. I was sexually abused by a babysitter around the age of 5. I have a dad who was a Navy SEAL in Vietnam with significant PTSD, and we have substance abuse in our family. So I started my journey as a child with my own kind of lived experiences of trauma. And I'm also an empath. So I had like this stamp on my forehead that said, I will listen, I can hold space, I know what it's like. And so I was often the kid in high school or wherever where, I was the person people came to with their problems, but I didn't know how to help myself in those situations. I didn't know how to have boundaries. I was constantly sick and tired because I gave so much of myself and I didn't know how to, like I said, set those boundaries and come back to myself and protect myself. So I became a massage therapist. I was a massage therapist for many years. I went to school when I was 17. I took my life savings to become a massage therapist. And I noticed there was a lot of trauma on the table. I did deep work. People would spontaneously start telling me trauma stories. And I was like, oh, shit, okay, it's happening here too. Like, all right, I'm not sure I'm your body worker. I'm not sure how to hold that for you or what to do with that. So I would just listen and, tell them let it move through, things like that. I was also a drama teacher for many, many years, and I worked with teenagers on sharing their stories from the stage. And so they would share personal stories, and often there was trauma in the stories. And they would go home after our workshops, and they might use, or they might cut, or they might feel suicidal. And I just kept getting pointed in this direction of like, I need to know more about trauma. I need to understand how to hold space without re-traumatizing. I need to know how to help people set their own boundaries and like take a moment and a breath to step back away from the story and re-regulate their system before moving forward and all of those things. So I decided in my 30s to go back to school to become a therapist and naturally specializing in trauma. So I went to school to be a drama therapist, using theater and storytelling and myth and metaphor as a way of processing trauma and playing with stories and using that theater background. And it was just like, I could not believe there was actually something called drama therapy. Like it blew my mind that actually existed. So once you get your training as a therapist, you have to do your 3,000 hours. And so it was just like, I started to get further and further actually away from the drama therapy as I collected my hours at different clinics and all of that, went to a lot of trainings and still, like many of us, felt that imposter syndrome when it came to calling myself a trauma specialist. Even though I was inundated in it in my practice, there was still just that like kind of imposter stuff that would come up. And as I got further into my work and I decided to open my private practice, it was amazing how all of my traumatic experiences came right back into my business when it came to things like visibility or taking risks or, whatever. So what I often say to people is that it's not if you've experienced trauma, because we all have. It's how is it continuing to affect you today? That is the issue. Because trauma is defined by four things. It's something that was sudden and shocking to your system. It was a threat to your safety or identity. You were helpless in the situation or frozen. You couldn't flee or fight. And you felt isolated, either because you felt so much shame you couldn't talk to somebody about it, or you tried to talk to somebody about it and they shut you down and told you it's not important or don't talk about that or whatever. So those four criteria, we've all had that. Your third grade teacher who humiliated you in front of the class, threatened your identity as a good student. It was sudden and shocking. You didn't expect it. You felt paralyzed in front of the class and too embarrassed to tell your parents about it because you thought that you did something wrong, right? So we all have those experiences and stories in us. And it's not the thing that happened that's really the trauma. It's what I believed about myself or the world in that moment, the belief that got created in that moment, and how it's still living in my body and central nervous system. Those two things are what keep the trauma coming back into our present experience anytime anything smells like, looks like, sounds like, anything related to that original trauma. And so the only way to really move it is from the central nervous system up, because we do not process trauma from the frontal cortex. We do not process trauma from the part of our brain that thinks things through. We can't access it from there. It's actually in our visual cortex, through our pupils, filtered down into the base of our, the kind of reptilian brain, right? The brain stem, and then down through our spine into our central nervous system. Those places is where it gets locked. And so it's why, as Christina said, you might have a client have this totally irrational response to something. And it's because that tripwire just got tripped and their central nervous system is reacting. And the pattern is kind of set. Oh, this happens, my body does this, I get flooded, I start freaking out, I start overanalyzing, I start pushing away, or whatever those trauma symptoms are. And like you said, it's hard to address somebody in that particular situation when they're flooded. So what I see in coaching, and I love that you brought this up, Christina, is like, where is that line between noticing and doing those powerful questions and like, I see that this is a big one. I can see that we're up against an internal wall with you. I know how badly you want to break through this, and we want to help them get there. The challenge is window of tolerance. So when someone is highly resourced, one of the first things I do with any trauma survivor, I call them thrivers, they thrive despite the trauma, is self-care. Sounds silly that you would start there, but if they don't have any resourcing, you can't actually help them access the trauma because their subconscious is going to tell them it's not safe enough to go there. And so when there's some resourcing, the first thing we can do for our clients is to help them resource, right? What do you do for pleasure? What are your self-care practices? Who do you talk to when you're upset about things? You know, all of that helps create that foundational baseline so that when things do get difficult, they don't fall on their face flat on the concrete. There's cushion there for them to land on. Trauma survivors, if you think of like, this is kind of the normal window of tolerance for most people. And window of tolerance meaning that if something distressing were to happen, there's room for me to go, oh crap, that sucks, you know, and I don't like that, and just kind of be with whatever the experience is without getting overwhelmed by it. And then the lower end, it's that I can stay present and in my body. I don't dissociate and check out and you know, kind of leave myself in the experience. So most of us, our window of tolerance looks like this, and there's plenty of room. But for a trauma survivor, like the window of tolerance is small, so there's way less room between the activating event and a flooding, and or an activating event and a need to completely check out and disappear from the emotional experience. And so we have to keep that in mind if we know that a client has a trauma history, to keep checking in with them about how they're doing. And a way that I use is often just like a SUDS rating, right? Those of us who've learned NLP or hypnosis or any of that kind of stuff, you know, we've learned to ask, what is your subjective unit of distress? Are you an 8 on the scale of distress? Are you a 6 on the scale of distress? Or are you feeling pretty chill and you're like, you know, a 2? You're noticing it a little bit, but not much. It's important because if someone is around an 8 and they don't have self-care skills and ways to regulate, they're going to flood. It's pretty much a guarantee. And so what we want to teach our clients who have a trauma history is that it's okay to back off. It's okay to stop, slow back down, come back inside and regulate. The point of trauma work is not to replay the story of the trauma. The point of trauma work is to regulate your central nervous system. End of story. If I can be regulated and I can be embodied when I'm pissed at you or you're pissed at me, then I can stay present. I can access my tools. I can access my intellect because my brain is not on fire. When you look at like brain scans, right? If the area of the brain is red, it's overactivated. If it's like a healthy green or yellow, it means there's lots of energy going in, but it's a regulated amount. And then if it's black or blue, it means there's no blood going to that part of the brain. There's no activity happening there. When we are flooded, we're in the red. And when we're in the red, we cannot access our frontal cortex no matter how hard we try. It's just not physically possible. I don't care how brilliant you are, you know, unless you have the ability to switch that, you know, flip that switch really quickly to come back inside, you cannot access your thinking brain. And sometimes in coaching, it's like we're trying to get them to like, come on, tell me what's going on, you know, get in there. And when they're flooded, they simply can't. So the tools are really simple, like, can you just stop for a second and look me in the eyes, and let's just take a couple breaths together. Co-regulation is one of the core components of trauma work, in the sense that, like, if Christina was losing her shit, my job is to stay as calm and as regulated as possible, to use a very modulated tone. Christina, can you look me in the eyes, please? Just take a moment. Let's just breathe together. Ready? 1, 2, 3. You know, and we just are helping bring them back to the present moment and to the relationship that you've created with them. Because that's more than any skill you could ever have. That is your magic. You have a relationship, you have rapport, use it. That's your greatest gift. And just that can help keep someone from flooding. If someone were in a true full-on flashback, you just keep doing that. You keep orienting them to time. You're in my office. It's 7 o'clock on Friday evening, you know, July 1st, 2021. Can you feel your feet? Can you hold my hand? You know, like just continuing, and also to let them know it's going to pass. That's a really important language for them to hear, because they trust you, right? And it will. It does pass. No one stays in flashback forever. It's not possible, right? So it will pass. And just letting them know that and staying with them can be so supportive to their system. And then you just check back in again. You know, what happened? Are you okay to talk about it? Do we need to shelve it for right now and maybe do some mindfulness practices or whatever, right? So the question that you brought up earlier about mindfulness, I think is really important. They have shown that meditation for trauma survivors, I haven't heard this so much about ADHD, but with trauma survivors specifically, can be extremely terrifying. So often meditation means you're closing your eyes. For someone with a sexual abuse history or physical abuse history, that can be a very scary thing to do in front of somebody that they don't know or that they haven't built true trust with. The other piece is that their body has been an unsafe place. You're asking them to be inside their body. And so it's like a muscle that has to be built. And so if you're aware that that is part of their history, then you can help them figure out, like, where is their edge? Is it 30 seconds? Is it 5 seconds? You know, is it a full minute? Like, where is their edge with that? There's also plenty of mindfulness activities out there that have nothing to do with closing your eyes and meditating. Like washing the dishes can be a mindfulness practice if you let yourself fully feel the heat of the water and keep one hand out and notice that this hand is cold and this hand is warm and what's that smell, and just like getting into all of these submodalities of any given situation is a mindfulness practice. If your client is ADHD, they're not going to do well with a meditation, but having them count their steps when they go take a walk, having them notice how many different sounds they heard in a 5-minute period of time. Any of those things can also be building the muscle for the client to feel a sense of control. I get to choose where my focus goes, because one of the core symptoms of trauma and ADHD is I can't concentrate. I can't focus my attention. I get distracted easily. Some people are misdiagnosed with ADHD in adulthood because it's actually ongoing traumatic response. They have learned to check out. They've learned to avoid discomfort, right? So anything that causes me discomfort, I'm going to avoid. Whereas with true ADHD, it's that doesn't hit the novelty center of my brain. So I'm going to just fucking ignore it. It doesn't mean anything to me. There's no, why would I do that? Why would I do that? I don't like that, right? Which is a whole different.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Right? I like to joke that it's like, I have just enough ADHD to understand, but not be diagnosed with it. I have just enough trauma to be able to understand, but not be like completely knocked out by it, like, thank you for all of these experiences that help me. So I do not know if there is a correlation between adult ADHD diagnoses and trauma. It does make sense because it probably actually is trauma and not ADHD. It would be my sense of it. Children with true ADHD generally get diagnosed around 4th or 5th grade because that's when lectures get longer and they have to pay more attention, and it gets harder for them to sustain their level of attention. And so most kids, it's pretty clear when they're struggling to focus and pay attention. Same token, a trauma survivor in school would be doing the same thing. A trauma survivor in school would be checking out, not hearing what the teacher said, things like that. Let me see, I have my notes here. Oh, okay, so there's big T traumas and little T traumas. Big T traumas, war, death, violence, sexual assault, and then the little T traumas are the 3rd grade teacher who humiliated you in front of the class. What's fascinating is it's harder to work with the little T traumas than it is the big T traumas. Big T traumas can actually be collapsed fairly quickly. The little T traumas become wrapped up in our identity. And so when you think about it, if I'm trying to pull out a strand of my identity, that's fucking painful. It hurts. I have to reorient myself constantly to this new concept of myself. And so I think that's probably more likely what coaches run into, is this barrier of just like, we just can't unravel this one. Like this one just seems like it's locked in there like cement. And the way that I work with trauma, that it just feels so supportive to people, is recognizing that this is a part of them that is locked or frozen in this experience. There's a part of them that's frozen there. And whenever we get reminded of a trauma, it basically kind of comes in and like knocks us out of the way, which is why we often feel like, why the hell did I say that? Or why am I reacting so strongly to this? Like, I just don't get it, because it's not you. It's the part of you that's frozen, that's coming into your current experience, and you're blending with them. And so it feels like you, but it's really not. It's this part. So I do a lot of parts work with clients where I have them identify like when this happens, how old do you feel? Like, what does this remind you of in your life? How, and can we go back and just like first validate that part? Like, it makes perfect sense that they would feel the way that they feel, or that they did what they had to do. And then can we educate them and help them understand how things are different now? I'm no longer in that environment. Dad's dead. That teacher got fired or whatever. And I'm now an adult with a whole lot of coping strategies and tools and life experience. So can you let me take that burden away from you? Can you let me like hold that? Because I'm an adult and I can hold that for you. You should just go play. That's what you should be doing. It's just going and playing, or going and listening to your rock music, or whatever age we're kind of stuck at for that particular experience. And what's so beautiful is that 9 times out of 10, that part's just like, where the fuck have you been? Like, thank God you showed up. Like, it's about time, they just wanted to be heard and acknowledged and seen, and have somebody literally say, you don't have to carry that anymore. It's mine. I'll have clients create rituals, go to the river, throw in a rock, or have something float down the river and watch it go away, or do that in their imagination, however they want to do it. But to really work with that part of them and help them unburden it, take it off, and say, all right, now just bring those juicy qualities of that part that got stifled or lost along the way because they also got frozen over here. So when we have those parts of us, like, I used to be a dancer, I used to be super creative, or I used to be super like social, and now I'm a hermit and I don't go anywhere. It's usually because this part is not only carrying the trauma, it's also carrying the gifts. And so how can we come back to collect those gifts and reintegrate them into our system and go, okay, but I don't have to carry the trauma also. That can be released. That can be unburdened from the part. Let's see. So co-regulation, I talked about that. So I think, I could talk about this all day long. I could literally just talk forever. So questions, anything that you want to bring up, anything I touched upon that you're curious about or want to understand more about?
Okay, so I love what you're sharing, and it's so interesting because it's so in alignment with what one of my main teachers has been teaching forever, but isn't calling it this.
Right.
But definitely the same skill set. I'm curious about ways that, like, are there ways that you teach your clients within sessions sort of certain skill sets to be resourced? And then after a certain while where they have access to that within the session space, and this is kind of more transy hypnosis-y kind of stuff, then begin to do the parts work, or then begin to sort of like touch into the other places. And if so, how do you do that? How do you teach clients to find resources? Because for me, I know when I was starting to do this kind of work, when it was like, okay, settle down, feel the thing, great. And now find the resources, like think of a time when you were a kid and it would be just like deer in the no. The moment
Right.
it was like find a resource, I just start crying because there's no resources.
Yes. So you will see this a lot with trauma survivors, that I'm stuck there because I didn't have any resources.
Right.
But I do an inventory. What part of my assessment is like, what are your resources? What are your spiritual resources? Do you have a dog? Do you want to imagine your dog sitting on your lap during the session when we reach some difficult points in the session, so that you just know that energy is here? Do you have guardian angels that can be touching your shoulders while we tap into this particular feeling or this experience or thought pattern? So first, it's actually a good intake question to ask, because if someone has no resourcing, it's not that you can't coach them, but it will be difficult.
Mm-hmm.
Every time you run into these things, there's going to be that stoppage, because a part of them is not going to feel safe enough to let you go there. Right. And unless there's some aspect of resourcing, the subconscious mind is like, we're not going there. Fuck that. What's that over there? And all of those dissociative processes start happening. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So you can also use a body resource. One of my favorites is a body resource, which is like, okay, so if you close your eyes right now in this given moment, because even with significant trauma, I can help clients find, like, do your toes feel neutral? Like, is any part of your body feel neutral, calm, grounded, or anything else that feels resourcing? Is usually the question that I will ask. So they can, if their feet they can really feel their feet on the ground, that's a body resource.
Mm-hmm.
They just keep bringing them back to that. If you see any kind of dysregulation, like, feel your feet, your feet on the floor. It could be the backrest behind them. It could be the fact that they like the feeling of the hair on the back of their neck. Doesn't matter. Just ask them, where in your body do you feel neutral, calm, grounded, or anything else that feels resourcing? Neutral is good. You don't have to feel positive. That's toxic positivity, right? If I don't feel positive, I'm not going to force myself to feel that way. But I can feel a sense of neutrality, or just like nothing's happening there.
Yep.
Right? So those can also be resources. It's like getting creative with the resourcing, right? Like anything. Is there a color that feels resourcing to you? I love the color blue. It always makes me feel calm. Great. Imagine that you're surrounded by blue. And then let's see if that is enough to help us go into whatever we're experiencing.
I have another question.
Yeah.
So when working with clients at these levels, the rapport and the trust that you're talking about, that way of like sponsoring a space for them to experience its okayness and then love for themselves because you're holding that kind of thing. Over time, have you had experiences of transference where, because of the release and the relief, and that you're the person with which they were able to, whatever the thing is, whether you become mom or dad or whatever, because of the intensity of the positivity of that experience, it gets muddy somehow?
So I would say at the beginning of my career, yes. Yes. And I think that's pretty normal. Like you can't teach that into yourself before you've had the experience of noticing a sense of enmeshment with a client, over identifying with their story. Like they say, compassion is endless. Compassion isn't the issue. Compassion fatigue doesn't exist because compassion is literally endless. It's empathy fatigue. Over identify with your story. I start to blend with you in that. I start taking on the burden of the energy of your story. That's what causes my fatigue. Right. So when it comes to the relationship, when I know that we've done really deep work, because the challenge can always be also like, you're not going to be in their back pocket for the rest of their lives, right? Like, you've got to help them internalize this experience. And the way that I share with clients often is like maybe you didn't get validation from mom, or you didn't get validation from your partner, or you didn't get the things that you needed during a particular experience. And we often search outside of ourselves for that. And it makes sense when we're children because that's all we got, right? The reality is we are the only one who can ever validate us to the degree that we need, because we are the only one that was there. We're the only one that actually understands the level and depth of the impact of this experience on us. We're the ones feeling the emotions. And so part of the tool bag is like, thank you for letting me be that person for you up to this point. How do we help you internalize and give yourself the same messages you think I would give you? It's like the transitional object, right? It's like, what was that phrase? The what would Jesus do kind of, thing that people would say, right? So it's like, well, what would Michelle do? What would Christina do? Or what would we say? It's okay to acknowledge that relationship and to say, now your job is to start incorporating your own safety for yourself, validating yourself. What is it that I do for you? Like, really, what do I do for you? Oh, I hold space, I validate. Great. Can you do that for yourself? Resourcing. Okay. Yeah. So, and that's a dance because, sure, for some of our clients, we'd love to hang out with them forever because they're fun and we enjoy them, but that's its own form of countertransference, right? It makes me feel good. It makes me feel impactful in my work, can feel special in somebody's life. They rely on me. My joke, even when I do therapy, is like, my job is to help you fire me as quickly as possible. That's my job. I do not want you dependent on me. That's not what we're here for. I want you to become dependent on you. And I want to get there as quickly as we possibly can. So, to answer the question that popped up in the chat. So resourcing is anything that helps us feel supported. So that could be our spirituality, that could be imagining something that helps us feel safe, imagining that we're doing the whole session on like the beach with in a full sun, and that feels really safe to us, or in a little cave in the woods where nobody can get to us, or anything that the brain or imagination can come up with that feels like an extra support when we're going into something that might be challenging emotionally for a client. And so that could be their own body, that could be giving them a blanket, it could be their imagination, anything really that just helps them feel more support than what we can give in a session. Because again, that's part of helping them build the resourcing they're going to need for us to step away at some point, right? Because if they're able to do that more, and we're teaching them that every single time we help them find a resource, is actually, you've got this. You've got the resources you need. You don't actually need me, at some point, like the relationship is done and that's okay. And that's healthy. Does that make sense? Okay. Yeah.
Question?
Yeah.
Well, first one, when you talk about parts and resources and integration, are you referring to IFS? Do you use a lot of IFS in your your practice?
So it's an interesting question because I do use IFS now that I've learned about it, but for 15 years, I didn't know IFS and I was still doing it.
Okay, yeah.
So I think my drama therapy background helped me with that. Like, what is the part of you, like, because we all have it. Like, it makes sense in our language, right? A part of me is pissed at you. A part of me gets why you said what you said. So yes, I since have learned more about IFS. Once I heard about it, I was like, oh, that sounds really cool. Like,
I've been doing this for 15 years.
Right?
To answer your question, IFS is internal family systems. It's a modality of psychotherapy, and which is evolving into coaching. My question is, at what point does one know if, like, for instance, I got a call from a family friend that I haven't seen in 15 years. And I had a session with her today and learned that there was a lot of trauma in her background, a lot of trauma. And I'm just not certain if I don't want to do any damage. So at what point for those of us that are coaches that don't have a psychotherapy background, is it appropriate to work with them from a coaching perspective? Just curious your thoughts on that.
Yeah. So I think, again, this is everybody's unique experience and their felt capacity and all of that. We are going to run into trauma no matter what. But when you see that there's complex trauma is its own animal. If you don't plan on being in this person's life for the next 5 to 10 years, I would suggest not.
What's complex trauma?
Complex trauma is when they've had either the same trauma repeated for many years, or they grew up in an environment where it was like one trauma after the other, after the other, after the other. Because for most people, the trauma was relational, right? So a car accident is a very different kind of trauma than being beaten by your father. It's a relational trauma. That relational trauma is going to get played out in your relationship with them. It's, you're going to be pushed to your edges. You got to be really clear about your own shit. Like, if you haven't done your own trauma work, don't touch trauma with a 10-foot pole. I mean, really, to be perfectly frank.
That's good.
In order to co-regulate, you have to have done your work. You cannot be spinning out with a client who's spinning out. Like, you just can't. You've got to be in control of your own central nervous system. So the way that someone has had complex trauma, you can do an ACEs scale, which is probably one of the simplest ways to see, like,
what is that?
ACEs, ACES. It's the Adverse Childhood Experiences Scale. And so what they've discovered is, like, 4 is kind of like, oh, that's manageable. We can probably work with that. When you've got people who have hit like 11, you're dealing with complex trauma, a lot of identity issues. And again, like I said, when it's unwinding a strand of the identity, it's painful, it's a process. It's very different from collapsing a particular experience. And then, because of the relational piece, my suggestion would be, it's not that you can't do coaching, but I would be an adjunct or have an adjunct clinician or someone who specializes in trauma working with the trauma that comes up in the coaching sessions.
Yeah.
So we're aware that this has come up, go see your person, unravel that, work with that. We can always come back to that subject when you're ready to, and that's a challenge, because even as a coach, I have people come to me because of my therapy background, but as soon as I recognize that their depression symptoms are impacting their coaching, I am being unethical if I continue with them. And I have to tell them, like, in my contract, it says, if I see that there is a mental health issue, my job is to refer you out for the mental health treatment, because coaching is not actually possible right now. And so let's come back when your system is regulated so that we can do the coaching. And that might be similar with trauma, right? Maybe it's a particular trauma that's dysregulating them, have them work with the trauma person and come back to you when that feels like it's regulated enough or safe enough to be able to work with.
Makes total sense. Thank you.
Yeah.
So in the complex trauma scenarios, if you're noticing that, so let's say that you have a long-term coaching, supporting relationship with somebody, and you potentially would be there for years. And so then you get to the deeper levels and you have some,
Right.
I'm talking about myself, some facility of working with people
Yeah.
and training. So then you're interested and willing to go there, and you're completely aware of the relationship being the working out of all that stuff is starting to happen. So then you become the bad guy and all sorts of stuff get projected on you. And then there's kind of like pushing and pulling and all sorts of things going on that inadvertently create my own responses, which I have to honor. But within the relationship of that, my job is to stay neutral, right? To stay grounded, to not be triggered in my own ways. In that,
And a way that you can help them is to say, what does this remind you of?
okay,
What
well,
dynamic between us in this moment remind you of? Because
that's
it's
good.
not about you. It's about that past
Right,
relationship coming into the current moment. And when we can help the client separate that out
right,
just by asking a question like that, like, what does this remind you of?
right.
I hear that you're feeling like I'm not hearing you, or I'm not understanding, or like, when has that happened to you before? Then you're like really letting them kind of go into that connection between the two. Because the other thing about trauma that, you know, is so helpful for folks is to just like assume this is a trauma flashback. Assume this is, I call them feeling flashbacks, right? Assume this is a feeling flashback. If you know this is over the top, it's irrational, it doesn't make sense, it's too much, it is a feeling flashback. Just own it and give yourself that moment to go, huh, what's that connected to? Oh, that's right. My dad would always like poo-poo anytime that I said I wasn't feeling good. He would tell me to pull myself up by the bootstraps. Fuck, it's a dad thing. All right. Now that I know it's a dad thing, can I take a breath? Can I like, thanks, Dad, but no thank you, you know, come back into the current experience and be with what really is. So the DBT skills, the dialectical behavioral therapy skills, which are not therapy, that's what I love about them, is you can actually teach them to clients and not have to be a therapist because it's not therapy, is how do I learn to tolerate distress? Because people with a trauma history have a really hard time tolerating any distress, right? How do I regulate my emotions by identifying them, validating them, normalizing them, doing what I need to do to kind of like reduce the intensity of those, and then come back so that I can access this part of my brain. There's interpersonal effectiveness, because trauma impacts the way that we communicate with others, because we assume our needs are not going to be met. We assume you're going to get mad at us, you know, whatever that is. And then the other piece is the mindfulness piece. And DBT was created for borderline personality disorder, which is a trauma-based identification, right? You cannot have borderline personality disorder without trauma. It just doesn't really exist.
I like those 4 things. That's great.
Yeah. And when you keep that in mind is like your framework, like, okay, have we touched on mindfulness and resourcing? Do they know what to do with these big emotions when they have them? Are they aware that they're just feeling distressed? Like, one of my favorite things to say is, what if nothing's actually wrong? What if you're just having a feeling? Because our anxiety brain or our trauma brain will convince us that something is wrong, and the reality is nothing is wrong. We're a very safe person having a conversation, right? So it's those reminders to the system that they're actually safe, right? That everything's okay. We're here right now. Let's take a breath, you know, almost similar to the flashback experience, right?
Have you heard of, sorry,
Yeah.
my mind went to somatic. So one is
Yes.
experiencing. So,
Yes.
so using the body directly instead of the mind thinking. So many ways, different ways to get at this, right? With parts
Yes.
work.
Yes.
So cool.
Yes.
So good to see you, Andy.
So good to see you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. I really
Beautiful. Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
I have a client right now who's studying something to do with tremor release, something like a shaky.
Oh, TRE.
TRE, right. So that as a modality, I'm curious if that's good or what you think of that. And then obviously somatic experiencing, which is sort of now kind of understood to be a good.
Yeah. So the research has shown especially over the last, I would say 5 years, but if not the last 10 years. If we do not address trauma from the body, we are not addressing trauma. So because of that awareness in the field, there are a lot more modalities coming up where you learn how to use the body, or like you said, how to bypass the critical mind, because we're real good at the story. We don't have to, we know the story. We talk about it all the time. When you talk about your same story 55 billion fucking times, it's because you haven't gotten into the body response, the central nervous system, all of those places where it's actually locked in, right? So somatic experiencing is a way to process basically bottom up. And brain spotting is something that I do specifically, that is another modality that processes from kind of the body up. And so somatic experiencing is fantastic. There's, again, anything is fantastic as long as it's trauma informed. So if you're really clear about what this person's resourcing is, if you have an agreement that they're going to let you know if they are hitting the edge of their window of tolerance, that you check in with them fairly regularly if they're hitting the edge of their tolerance. Especially I think for those of us in female bodies, there's so much vicarious trauma. There's so much just in the story of being in a feminine body, out in the world, that really is kind of constantly re-traumatizing for women. So being in their bodies it can feel very unsafe. The diet culture, the ad agencies, all of this stuff. And so being able to teach men and women or non-binary folks how to be in their bodies safely is really a life skill. Like this, they should be teaching this in school. Like one of my missions in life is reading, writing, arithmetic, and relationships. Like relationships and all of the tools around that has got to be a part of our school system, and our relationship to ourselves being one of them, right? Our relationship to our own body. So somatic experiencing is highly effective. It focuses on the central nervous system, which is what any good trauma treatment will do. TRE, I'll be honest, I don't know a lot about it. I've heard of it. I haven't really done much research on it. So I can't speak to that, but my sense from what I have seen is that it's very similar, right? It's you're still doing things to help regulate the nervous system, even EFT, even tapping. The whole point of tapping is that you are regulating the central nervous system through the acupressure points as you're speaking about something that's distressing, right? So it's all pointing in the same direction. This is the beauty of what we do, is the art. I get to choose, oh, I like that. I like clinical hypnosis. That sounds fancy and cool and fun. So I'm going to go explore that and experiment with that. TRE sounds really hot. Maybe I'm going to go, get a little bit of training in that. You can't be too trauma informed. It's not possible. I've been doing this shit for 15 years and I'm still like voracious in like, what's that newest research? Like, what's that new modality? Like, oh, I got to learn it, Part of that is the imposter syndrome shit. And some of it is the fact that I just love learning. And so I always want to have as many tool belts in my back pocket as possible. So I love, Christina, that you brought this up, just because I do think it's a missing component of coaching programs. Here's the fun fact, also a missing component of therapy programs.
That's crazy.
Can you believe that shit? There are so many therapists who are not trauma informed and understand nothing about trauma. They refer out when their client comes in with trauma. I'm like, are you kidding me? So it's not just coaching that doesn't have that specific training in how to be trauma informed. It's also people who do this for a living as a therapist.
That's shocking, just only because I can't think of a client who I go underneath more than just sort of consulting about stuff level, that we don't hit something that is about this.
Exactly.
Especially, I think, I love that you made that distinction. What about the like insipid ones that become part of the identity, right? And like slowly like in differentiating that, that's the lifetimes of work that every human has.
It is. And I joke with clients, and maybe it's not the greatest metaphor ever, but I joke that we've just done psychic surgery. You need to treat yourself accordingly. Like it's going to take time to integrate this new information about yourself. It's going to take time to remind your body that it's okay to relax and be safe, or, you know, whatever it is. And so, you know, you got to drink lots of water and take care of yourself and have somebody else take care of you and ask for what you need. And because when we're unraveling an identity piece, it's big. We have to recalibrate. And a lot of people get stuck, and that's why we go to the default. It's uncomfortable. I don't like the distress of having to reorient myself to this new identity of myself. So I'm just going to go back to those old behaviors.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, we see that a lot. And so that's where we can really be the cheerleader to remind them, like, I know what you want. You told me what you want. Do I need to remind you of what you want? Here's a picture that you painted of me last session about what you really, really want. Is that helping you get what you really want? It's not. Shit. Okay, what do you want you to do to help yourself in between sessions or in between these discussions to remember that this is what you want for yourself? You know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
And I'd be happy to, if questions pop up, obviously after the fact or after people have watched the recordings, you know, I'm happy to pop in and answer to the best of my ability if I can.
Thank you so much. This has been amazing.
You're so welcome.
Got a lot out of it. I have said, you know, in my programs and with clients for years that, you know, people talk about master coaches, you know, like, or deep coaching or whatever, like the levels that you get better and better at, that the coaches that really kind of end up rising just naturally because they have referrals and word of mouth and time and experience and all that kind of stuff, above the din, all have some kind of therapeutic-y sort of training. You can't get away from that.
You can't. Yeah, absolutely. And there's so many out there. It's like, really allow yourself to be incredibly curious and talk to people who've had experiences with different modalities, and just you know, it's its own market research, right, around what modality fits your personality and your belief system that you can use that helps you feel more confident and competent in dealing with trauma when it shows up in the room, because it's not a matter of if, it's when. And
I'm so grateful that you're a resource in our community.
Thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me in. I was so excited.
Share this recording everywhere.
Awesome.
Cool. How can people get in touch with you if they like to?
Yeah, you can message me through Facebook if you would like to. My website is michellemaree.com. It's with 2 E's. My mother had heavy drugs when she gave birth to me, so she wanted to blend Mary Jo and Maria and came up with Maree. Resources, yes. So some of my favorite books: The Body Keeps the Score by Bessar van der Kolk. Oh God, I'm totally blanking out. Peter Levine. Look up Peter Levine's name. He has a bunch of books. I can't remember the title for some freaking reason. Something about the tiger. I'm like, what is it? Those are great resources. The movie that just came out with Gabor Mate, The Wisdom of Trauma. I think you can do a donation of some kind to be able to watch the full video. It was free for a while, but now they're doing it donation based. It's actually a really great, simple, hour-long. You can actually, I don't know if there's a way to do it, but you should be able to refer clients to it, because I think it's important. That psychoeducational piece is really important. Information by Peter Dawson, who really kind of helped me concretize those 4 pieces that make a trauma. Just having that language was really helpful for me, and describing to clients what might be happening. Thank you. Waking the Tiger. Yes. If you're into the body, you know, the somatic experiencing, embodiment practices, all of that. Let's see, I actually have it in front of me somewhere. No, maybe I don't. Books about, gosh, I'm blanking on that title too. Maybe I'll go through my list and create like a post that has some of these specific resources or books. Because some of them are great just to listen on audio, you know, because like you're not taking notes necessarily. You just want to have like a frame or a sense of how to talk to clients about this. There's some great little YouTube videos of like, if you go to brainspotting.com, there's some great little videos just describing to the client like what's happening in their brain when it comes to trauma, and why it makes perfect sense that they can't think when their husband's mad at them. You know, like, of course. So what do you need to do to regulate yourself so that you can then kick this part back in and say what you need to say? And sometimes that's like, I got to go away for 3 hours and figure it out. I got to go draw. I got to go to the beach. I got to do whatever. Then I can come back to you and talk to you about it. There's nothing wrong with that. Like that's a beautiful way to deal with the situation. Mine is to come back to my body. My husband knows that when I start putting my hands on my body, shit's about to get real, but I'm also going to be fully connected to my experience. I'm not going to be doing this. I'm talking from my own body and my own experience and what I'm aware of and the story I'm making up in the moment or whatever. Brene Brown is another good one around shame and vulnerability, because you cannot work with trauma without working with shame and vulnerability, because they go hand in hand.
I have another question if you have another.
Yeah.
An experience I've had, so I was taught this in a sort of esoteric lineage that I was part of, and I kind of was like, yeah, bullshit. And then I continued training and learning and growing for a decade and have come to, oh, it was true. That was right. Just different language, but that's totally right.
Right.
Where in terms of access to our centers or those sort of brain maps or whatever, when we have kind of happen naturally, easily through either like really high kind of like spiritual orgasm experiences, you know, whether you're whatever, you know, so you have those moments of like, right. And then like the super trigger, right? When we hit the whatever got knotted up on the inside in the nervous system, and then we hit it and we're triggered. And for myself, I have now found after years of fucking practice with it, that if I'm able to stay with some element of awareness of while this is happening, the flood, then I'm able to use that as an access point into the whatever that is in the first place, to kind of like in spiritual terms clear out that channel and start recreating a relationship there where I could kind of, in my sense, I'm like kind of like directing my own neuroplasticity around that groove and removing it in some other way.
Yes.
Science or to do spirituality, it's kind of like that's where the next step on the path, you know, to the freedom and enlightenment happens.
Yes.
Not that it's like free from that forever,
right.
but it's actually an opportunity.
So, it is an opportunity. Yeah.
So for myself, when I get flooded in the language you're talking about, I actually like that better than when I'm like kind of uncomfortable and la la la. Like when my body is on fire and I'm losing my shit, I know to like, okay, sit up and then focus, be able to just focus and let the feelings happen.
Yes.
Then I'm not quite sure if there's something more deliberate I could be doing while I'm in that state and aware to work it to the advantage in the moment.
Well, so what you're describing is the definition of, for me, the definition of embodiment. It is the bridge between the power of the mind and the wisdom of the body, right? Mm-hmm. So if I can access my body, I can ground, I can be aware, I can be present, even with the emotions like running wild through me and the story running wild through my head. It goes back to that idea of like, I identify it, I normalize it or embrace it. And just that act of normalizing it, embracing it, automatically starts creating an unraveling process. It's pretty innate that that's what starts to happen. That's why somatic practices are so effective, because you're bypassing the critical part of the brain and the story making, and you're actually allowing, okay, so here's the fascinating part. People who've experienced trauma who got everything they needed don't have trauma responses, right? So if in that moment that we're having any kind of flooding coming up, we give ourselves everything we needed, is calm, centered, aware, loving presence, there's no option but for it to start to dissolve.
Awesome.
Just what happens. And so we can either be patient with that process. And what I often do with my husband is like, I need to do my thing. Like, just like, I need to let this unravel for a minute. Give me a minute. Sometimes it's too much and I need to go somewhere else to do it. And sometimes I can do it right there in front of my husband and just take some breaths and just be really aware and like, okay, I've done that process of like figuring out where it came from and why I'm so activating in this moment and blah, 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 blah. And then I'm able to speak it right then and there without fearing that I'm going to fuck it up or I'm going to say the wrong thing or I'm going to get reactive again, because I've actually allowed my body to finish the processing somatically, which allows me to be grounded and centered enough to speak my truth in the way that really aligns with my heart. And that's a beautiful thing when we can get to that point with any safe person, including the coaches that we hire, to be able to notice this dysregulation and step into that beautiful awareness and let it do what it's naturally designed to do, which is to move through our system. Awesome. Which is coming back and saying this will pass is so important for clients, because it will.
Right. Amazing.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yay.
Get this out there.
Thank you so much.
You're amazing.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, guys, for coming.
Yeah.
Thank you. This was very, very informative. Thank you.
You're so welcome. You're so welcome.
Yeah.
And thank you for wanting to be trauma informed. Like that's, it's so important. It really is. And I will also put a link in. I actually have a colleague and a friend who this is a program she's created, is like being a trauma informed coach. That's awesome. And she's got a curriculum and does her group and all of that. And I really trust her. And so she's definitely a resource as well.
Awesome. And, can I ask everyone a favor? I'm gonna, not under the links of like, here's the link to the call. I'm gonna stop recording for the favor.